Hi all, I'm going to look at the fifth round of the classic New York Championship of 1963, in which Fischer had a clean sweep of the field with 11 straight victories. So in this round, Reshevsky was playing white against Fischer, and we're going to flip the board to get Fischer's perspective. So Fischer played a symmetrical system against the English opening, and after knight f3 he played knight c6, and what's interesting already is that after d4, which often gives white a small edge in the opening, he played first of all knight f6, and after knight c3, instead of fianchettoing his king's bishop, he was quite willingly prepared to go for an isolated pawn situation. So Fischer's proving yet again in this US Championship that he wasn't afraid of playing with the isolated pawn. He played e6, and after e3, d5. So we see now willingly accepting this isolated d-pawn for the counterplay it produces. And this is quite a theme throughout Fischer's career, and even in the 1972 match against Spassky, that he understood how pawn structure damage or accepting pawn structure compromises for peace activity became one of his penchants. So here, the bishop goes behind the isolated pawn for the moment, and after Kosel's knight f3, white's not really threatening to take that pawn. He plays bishop g4 because if white had taken that pawn, let's have a quick look now. He played g3 here, but if knight takes d5, we have knight takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop takes h2 check, winning the queen. So the pawn can't be taken at the moment, so Fischer played bishop g4, and after g3, Fischer succeeded in encouraging a light square weakness around the opponent's king, which becomes a major factor later for the tactics which Fischer won the game with. Anyway, he is threatened now with this pawn. It is really on this knight takes d5, so Fischer protects that pawn with bishop b4, and also threatens to structurally damage white's pawn structure, leaving an isolated pawn here and here. So Reshevsky plays bishop d2, and now Fischer plays a very aggressive move, which seems to work out very nicely in all variations, knight e4. For example, if knight takes e4, d takes e4, black is clearly better here, because if bishop takes b4, e takes f3, winning a piece, and if knight d4, then this wins a pawn, knight takes d4, and so that bishop's en prise now, so that bishop's immune. Bishop takes d2, bishop takes e2, queen takes d4, and lo and behold, Fischer's a pawn up. So this is a great move, this knight e4. Shows how aggressive the black position is already. Maybe g3 was dubious. So white played a3, taking time to try and ask Fischer what he's doing with that bishop there. And we have some simplification leading to these two isolated pawns. So the c4 square is going to be a useful pivot for Fischer's operations soon, as we're going to see. Rook c8. So the pawn is an isolated pawn on the semi-open c file, and now b6 to neutralise this pressure on the b line. And now we see the start of very good targeting and manoeuvres. Queen e7, targeting the isolated a pawn. So Reshevsky moves it, potentially with the idea of undermining b6 later with a5. Fischer protects his isolated pawn, and now queen a1, a very suave kind of manoeuvre by Reshevsky, threatening perhaps a5 in some variations, and also the rook can come behind the c pawn and maybe liberate that with c4 later. So white's position is okay here, and Reshevsky is probably quite content having still that blockade square on d4. There is a bit of pressure on the white king though, so he protected f3, and also maybe h3 is going to be a sensitive concern soon, as in the game. Knight e5, knight a5. So Fischer's eyeing that c3 pawn, which needs to be protected in some way. So Reshevsky protects it with knight d4. Now we see a very nice manoeuvre from Fischer. He plays knight b7 with the idea of knight d6 and knight e4. So manoeuvring this knight, using that isolated pawn outpost for gaining pressure on the f2 pawn, and also the knight's quite menacing on e4 for attacking this pawn as well. So this is the start of a good manoeuvre. Rook b4, knight d6 now. Now a5. So Reshevsky's increasing his pressure on the queen side. This queen side attack, though, is very elegantly handled by Fischer. Knight e4, not worrying about a takes b, because the pawn is immune. White can't play rook takes b6 here, because bishop h3 check, another sneaky check, king takes and queen takes b6, winning the exchange. So Reshevsky mounts up the pressure on the b pawn by playing queen b2, allowing his c3 pawn to go, and he plays now bishop a6 because he didn't want to immediately have that bishop munched by the knight, loosening his light squares. However, this still occurs in the game, the way Fischer played it. That pawn is still, by the way, immune now, even after Fischer's rook c5, because if rook takes b6 here, Fischer would have had knight a4, forking rook and queen, and again having this bishop h3 check, winning the queen at the end of it. So Reshevsky played cautiously with king g1, trying to consolidate his position before going on to the attack here again. Bishop h3 though, and this bishop's quite menacing around the light squares. After rook a1, it neutralises this counter move knight a4, so this pawn's really on. So Fischer decides to give that pawn up in order to grab the light squared bishop off white. And we see now these weaknesses on the light squares become decisive soon, because it's always hanging over white. White is now threatening Black is now threatening queen e4 and queen g2. So in order to parry this with f3, Reshevsky plays rook e1. So if queen e4 now, then f3, and the e3 pawn's protected. However, Fischer plays h5, very aggressive stuff. We see here, though, my analytical assistant believes white's slightly better. So Reshevsky has weathered the storm so far, but he does have this tactical liability, and he's getting into time trouble, which is something which happened to Reshevsky quite a bit. But here it's more dangerous than usual because there are some menacing threats to deal with. So Fischer played queen c2 here, allowing the check and taking of the d pawn. So check, king h8, knight takes d5, pawn up you would think. However, there is a very dangerous threat of queen e4. But not only that, Fischer created another very dangerous threat, because an immediate queen e4, maybe let's have a quick look at that. Queen e4, maybe knight f4, and it's okay for white, no big deal. So Fischer maximised his threats with actually playing rook c8, threatening also queen c1 check. And there's only one precise move here for white to keep saving this position and all the threats, queen b4, protecting both e4 and also parrying queen c1 check with queen e1 if necessary. However, he crumbled, he just gave away a piece here. And this is now a lost position for black, because black controls the c8 square with his bishop. So any check, like with rook b8, Fischer just played rook c8 here, and he's a bishop up now. And Reshevsky soon resigned here. So let's have a quick look at conclusions and summary of this game. Fischer was willingly accepting an isolated pawn, showing that he's not afraid of having bad structure if he's got some good piece play. He very cleverly minimised the overheads of that isolated d pawn by counter-attacking on white's pawns, particularly the one on c3 and a3 there. There was a very nice manoeuvre coming up with knight a5, first blockading white's a pawn and also preparing the knight for the attack, this attacking path. And we see here that even this pawn is immune now because of checks like bishop h3, or in some variations now knight a4. And so Fischer managed to get rid of white's potentially defensive light squared bishop. And it was these light squares which later soon proved decisive in the final position after rook c8. Reshevsky in time trouble didn't find queen b4, but it was still being a very difficult game after queen b4, even though Reshevsky would have been a pawn up. Fischer's got a lot of threats here to deal with, so it's not easy to play this position. So he blundered with knight c3, and then Fischer was just a piece up with a winning position at the end. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was Fischer's 5th game win in a row in the US Championship of 1963. Any questions or comments, please leave them on YouTube. Thanks for listening. See you later. Cheers for now.